This is the Legacy Network, VPPALN.org. The party report in Atlanta, Georgia. Calls are growing for an independent investigation into the police killing of an activist on Wednesday during a violent raid on an encampment of protesters opposed to the proposed $90 million Cop City training facility in a public forest. Law enforcement officers, including a SWAT team, were clearing out protesters who occupied a wooded area outside the center when the police claimed they were fired on, and they fired back. The police said a Georgia State trooper was wounded by the gunfire. Activists have now released the name of the victim of the police shooting, longtime activist Manuel Terran, who went by the name Portuguita. In an audio statement sent on Thursday by an Atlanta forest defender, he describes what happened and who Portuguita was. He asked to remain anonymous and for his voice to be distorted for security reasons. He had this to say: on Wednesday, January 18th, multiple police departments descended upon ALUMNI People's Park in unprecedented numbers. They blocked access to the park on both roads and bike trails. Some people were arrested for attempting to document police actions that day. At the park, gunfire was heard at 9:04 a.m., about a dozen shots fired in rapid succession, followed by a loud boom about a minute later. Hours after the murder of Tortuguita, police continued to hunt, assault, and arrest our brave forest defenders. Those defenders were targeted with pepper bullets. One forest defender had their treehouse, which stored food and water, cut from beneath them. He was left without food and water for over 12 hours up in the tree as police waited at the base of the tree to arrest him. The same forest defender continued to stay in the tree until the next morning when he was arrested. Forest defenders were chased by police dogs. Forest defenders had to hide and flee for their lives, all while knowing that their dear comrade had been murdered in the sacred land that we call home. Portuguita was a radiant, joyful, beloved community member. He fought tirelessly to honor and protect the sacred land of the ALUMNI forest and took great joy in caring for each and every person that he came across. Portuguita brought an indescribable jubilance to each and every moment of life. His passing is a preventable tragedy. The murder of Portuguita is a gross violation of both humanity and of this precious earth which he loved to so fiercely. Do not turn away from this violence. Do not allow the callousness of the police state to numb your heart. Honor Portuguita by bravely witnessing the ongoing injustices the police and corporations are enacting upon the ALUMNI forest. Honor Portuguita's legacy by embodying his joyous bravery. Portuguita's presence on this earth is a gift that will keep on giving for generations to come. It's time for the people to join this movement and to say no to the pointless escalation by the police. That was an anonymous statement by an Atlanta forest defender. His voice was distorted for security reasons. Visuals for the slain forest defender Portuguita have taken place from Los Angeles to Minnesota to Charlotte to Chicago, and Atlanta activists held a visual that night of the shooting and are planning to march on Saturday. Kamal Franklin, founder of the organization Community Movement Builders, had this to say: well, we have very little information on what took place besides what your earlier recordings just said. The only version of the event that we have is the police version and the police narrative, which we should say the corporate media narrative has ran away with. To our knowledge, we find it less than likely that the police version of the event is what really happened, and the idea that Portuguita was sitting in the tent and fired out of the tent at basically a SWAT team, the police department, and state troopers who were all there in great numbers. It just doesn't make sense. that this one person shot and then they fired back. There's little intel that we have. Some of the residents say they heard a blast of gunshots all at once. One blast and then a return fire. And there's no other information released. We don't know how many times this young person was hit with bullets. We don't know the areas in which he was hit. We don't know if it was friendly fire. All we know is the version of the police narrative, the one they're giving us, and that's why we're calling for an independent investigation. Not one that's done by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, not one that's done by a federal authority, but a complete independent investigation, because that's the only way we're going to know what really happened. But right now, based on what we do know, we cannot say anything except that this is probably a political assassination, that is something that could have been prevented. There is no reason for them to take the tactics that they did in terms of going into the forest with weapons in hand and to pepper spray with live ammunition to go to the forest defenders who were engaging in civil disobedience and direct action politics. Kamal Franklin had that to say. Kamal Franklin also had this to say: Cop City is an idea that came after the 2020 uprising. Cop City is an idea that came after the 2020 uprisings by the city of Atlanta, the Atlanta Police Department in Atlanta, the Atlanta Foundation, Atlanta Police Foundation. The idea basically is that they want to develop a militarized police base that's right next to black and brown communities. And by building this space, they want to cut down over 100 acres of forest. They want to develop an area where there's room for explosive testing, explosive firing ranges, and Black Hawk helicopter landing pads and training centers for them to practice crowd control. We should also mention that they're engaging in international trainings with the Israeli police, and we think this project really is the beginning of a militarized police base here in Atlanta, which will be the largest facility of its kind in the country. And the reason for doing this is to stop the uprisings. We believe it is to stop movement politics and movement building in Atlanta, and to coordinate efforts across the country with other police departments and now internationally to stop movement buildings. We think this is going to be further. So the terroristic actions on the black and brown communities by police state, which is out of control at this particular stage, come out. That's what Kamal had to say. Kamal also had to say this about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's visions lives on in Atlanta's fight against the new police training facility. Interestingly, in 2021, the city of Atlanta announced plans, for Cop City, saying it was to carry on the city's civil rights legacy of Martin Luther King and others. We live in a dysphoria where the legacy of Dr. King is being used by city officials, the same city officials who say they love Good Trouble, they love John Lewis, they love Dr. King. When Dr. King was alive, Dr. King was working against the police brutality and police militarization. Dr. King stated that the police themselves harass and are open to and conduct raids on communities. Obviously, Dr. King was surveilled by the FBI and local police task force along with federal police task force. They harassed Dr. King. They sent letters to Dr. King himself to kill himself. And so these tactics in different ways continue today. The Cop City Task Force, which is developed between the FBI and Cobb County Police Department, the Atlanta Police Department, several other agencies. Homeland Security is basically a task force to stop movement activities because they're afraid that the protesters, various types of protests are happening are getting the word out, and that no one has asked for Cop City and survey, that there's done shown that surveys that's been done has shown that 70% of the people have been against the building of this facility, but yet they went ahead and decided to build it anyway. And now there's a protest movements against it. They're using all actions and all of everything in their capability and capacity to stop this movement. And now they're turned to the idea of actually murdering protesters as a way to stop people from going into the forest and stop forest defenders from defending the forest. Last December, Atlanta forest defender Portuguita, who was shot dead by police this week, was featured in an article headline, "The Forest for the Trees," that was written by David Pisner, published on the Bitter Southerner. In the piece, Portuguita says, quote, "We get a lot of support from people who live here, and that's important because we win through nonviolence. We're not going to beat them at violence, but we could beat them at public opinion in the courts." Even he's also quoted saying, "This is my last home. Now we built a nice community here. It's about reclaiming the parks and public spaces in Atlanta community." He also had this to say, quote, "I spent time between Atlanta defending the forest from destruction and coordinating mutual aid for the movement in Florida, where they help build new houses in low-income communities hit hardest by hurricanes. They were a trained medic there. They were trained medics and friends and brave souls. So much in Portuguita's name, we continue to fight to protect the forest and to stop Cop City. We love range and a commitment to each other's safety and well-being. Occasionally we will go in, and we think obviously this is a dangerous time because the police tactics have stepped up to the point where they're actually using live ammunition to shoot and kill protesters. But for even with that said, we will continue to protest both in the forest and around the forest and in the largest city of Atlanta. And again, asking for not only national support but international solidarity on this issue, which we've gotten so far, which we expect only to step up more in the coming days and months. This protest movement is not over. It is not defeated. In the memory of a young person who was killed, we will continue to fight. Let's remember also there was over a dozen arrests yesterday. There are more people charged with domestic terrorism. Yes, domestic terrorism. The interesting thing is that they charge the people from out of town, people who are not Atlanta residents, with domestic terrorism. But they so far have not charged the latest round. They have not charged people who are arrested who are from the city of Atlanta with domestic terrorism. So we obviously think, again, these are scare tactics. These are tactics meant to criminalize the movement against Cop City. And it was really important that we keep hammering home that this task force is, or this idea about what's happening, this criminalization of movement politics is something that's being done with so-called moderate liberal Democrats in Atlanta and now right-wing Republicans, who is the governor of the state of Georgia, who's now somehow taking the lead in criminalizing and calling protesters names. But this is done together as a collaboration between the Atlanta political establishment and the governor of Georgia. And in the end of all their security forces, again, Atlanta police, cop, county, state troopers, in conjunction with the FBI and even Homeland Security, to criminalize the movement and now kill a young activist. You're talking about Governor Brian Kemp. And that's the report. This is the Legacy Network, BPP, ALN.org. As usual, the question is, where do we go from here? Panther people.